I'm 𝗕ance Scaramucci, and welcome to Open Book, where I talk with some of the most interesting and brilliant minds in our world today. Joining us on Open Book now is Elie Honig, CNN senior legal analyst, also a graduate of my alma mater, Harvard Law School, which is a pretty cool thing. You're like you're the better side of the Harvard Law School. I'm more of like the evil, capitalist, greedy side. You're the public servant side of the Harvard Law School. So it's nice to have you on.
I appreciate it, Anthony. Thank you. You're a good model for Harvard Law. I think Harvard Law is proud of you. I'm proud of you.
Well, I appreciate that. They always ask me for money, and of course I've donated money. So there you go.
That's the thing. They hold me up as some ideal, but you're the one they go to for money.
Well, I'm giving them the money because without them I would be nobody. But here's the title of the book is Untouchable: How Powerful People Get Away with It. I'm going to start where somebody didn't get away with something, and that's Al Capone. Because wasn't Al Capone untouchable? Is that a reference to him, or was that just you're firing that out there as a general reference for some of these types of people?
It was certainly meant to have a mob connotation about it, because a lot of the examples I use in the book, Anthony, are examples from my work as a Mafia prosecutor in Manhattan. And, you know, as I went through some of these old cases, and, you know, I love to tell a good mob story, I saw so many parallels between the tactics that savvy mob bosses would use and the tactics that regular folks, civilians, as the mobsters would call them, used. Al Capone is an interesting study because he ultimately did get his comeuppance, but only after he dodged the law for a very long time, and only after they really got him on almost a technicality of his taxes. I actually say in the book, I don't agree with that model of approaching. I don't talk in depth about Al Capone. I'm not going back in history like that, but I actually do not agree with the someone's got to nail this guy for something, and I don't care what, and I don't care how model of prosecution. I think things need to be done the right way, but even so, if they're done with enough spine and courage, powerful people can be brought to justice.
So I gave the book to a couple of my friends, some of my classmates from Harvard, and one of them said to me, wow, this is such a timely book because we're in a world of have and have-nots. Income inequality is really separating. Trump tells people that the system is rigged. He knows because he helped to rig the system. And you're writing about, from a prosecutorial perspective, how powerful people get away with things. And you're right, frankly. You're right. So let's go into it. Okay. Sure. Why do so many powerful people never face consequences of their actions?
So there's really, I see three causes here. One is we have a system with laws and procedures and internal policies that inherently help and favor powerful people, and we can get into those. Two is your savviest bosses, Donald Trump being high on that list, maybe the highest on the list, know exactly how to play it, sometimes in ways that we don't often recognize at face value. And third, I'm critical of prosecutors in this book. I argue that too many prosecutors have failed to do their jobs aggressively enough or smartly enough. And as a result, when you combine those three things, look, not every powerful person completely gets away with it. Plenty of powerful people wind up behind bars, but often it's belated, it's incomplete, or not at all. And so I sort of give examples to flesh out each of those three angles in the book.
You bring up a very famous case to lawyers, but probably not a super famous case to the public, called the Mourinho case. Tell us a little bit about the Mourinho case. Pretend I didn't. Of course, I know about it, but I want you to talk to people that wouldn't know that case, and how did that experience shape your view of power in the courtroom?
So I opened the book with this case. This is a real mafia case that I prosecuted. The defendant was a guy named Danny Marino, not the NFL quarterback, but the longtime Gambino powerhouse. Dan Marino's nephew, a guy named Frank Ḥidelь, was murdered when he was 31 years old. This is in 1998. Ḥidelь was basically set up by a bunch of his friends in the mob. They took him out to a strip club called Scarlett's in Staten Island. I opened the book at Scarlett's. And then when he goes outside into the parking lot, one of his other friends runs up to him, shoots him, and kills him. They killed him because they believed he was an informant. I end up taking over this prosecution. We end up charging and convicting basically all the people at the crime scene, the shooter, the setup guy, the getaway drivers, and various other people who were in on the planning. But the problem was, we knew that Danny Marino, who was the most powerful person involved in this, had to be involved, but we just didn't have strong enough proof. Finally, we flipped somebody who tells us, yeah, we sent word into Danny Marino. He was in prison for something else. We told him that his nephew was a rat. I don't like that word, but that's the word they use. And Marino's response to us was these simple 6 words: do what you have to do. And we charged Danny Marino based on that. Now, that is not a lot to go on, right? You can imagine what the defense would be. Well, do what you got to do. That could mean anything. That could mean beat him up. That could mean make sure and then get back to me. That doesn't mean kill him. We charged this case, and we, frankly, ended up pleading him out for 5 years, which, as I say in the book, I'm not proud of. I think it took guts for us to charge him. I think a lot of prosecutors would not have charged him. But in the end, because of the thinness of our proof, we had to give him a very, very favorable deal. And so I say in the book, this conundrum has plagued me since then. How did the most powerful person involved in this get away the lightest? And that sort of becomes a springboard for the book.
So 8, I mean, and I love it. I'm glad it's a great, obviously, explanation. It's why you're such a good prosecutor and so great on television.
Thanks.
You were a prosecutor 8.5 years. You were a state prosecutor for 5 years. So at the federal level, 8.5 years. You worked on a lot of mafia cases, okay? And the book details a lot of the mafia thinking with people like Donald Trump, Harvey Weinstein, etc. So what do these people have in common? The mafia dons, the civilian dons, but also somewhat criminal dons.
A lot of things. And I think the Marino case that I just explained gives us a couple of examples. One, they know how to insulate themselves. You know, sitting at the top of that hierarchical pyramid really provides invaluable protection because a smart boss very much limits who he talks to. And when he talks to those people, he's very careful about what he says and doesn't say. Think about Donald Trump. Think about January 6th, right? Be there, will be wild. He never said, hey, everyone, go down and smash the windows at the Capitol and beat up cops. But dozens of people who've since been arrested and charged said, well, that's what we understood him to be telling us. Look at Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen got convicted of lying to Congress about Trump's efforts to build in Moscow. And when Michael Cohen was asked by Congress, did you lie because Donald Trump told you to lie? Michael said, and I think honestly, he said, no, that's not how Donald Trump works. He never said to me, Michael, I need you to go in there and commit perjury. He said, Michael, I heard you got your subpoena. You know we didn't do anything wrong, and I trust that you're going to do the right thing. And again, that's an example of being very careful with your words, similar to do what you got to do. You leave yourself a little bit of wiggle room or plausible deniability. So those are two of the ways: the insulation of being at the top of the pyramid, being very careful and limited in who you actually talk to, and being very guarded in the way you say things. Those are all very common tactics.
So, and just to add to that, you know, Mr. Trump, President Trump, never on email,
right?
Very rarely on text.
Yep.
Lots of face-to-face conversations, so he couldn't be recorded by anybody.
Exactly.
No one-party recordations of his voice.
Right.
So there you go. And there is a famous situation, which you're well aware of, and CNN reported on this a while back, where Michael Cohen himself recorded Donald Trump in discussions over the Stormy Daniels payments. And so
and that could become part of the case against Trump if that case ends up getting indicted, although that recording sort of cuts both ways if you really dig into it. Yeah.
It does. It does. And so it may not be used in the case.
Yeah.
But let's consider Donald Trump for a second. One of your best lines in the book, I literally laughed when you wrote it, was that there's a chance by the time you're holding this book, Trump is indicted. Okay. Everybody's focused on an indictment. You know, I've heard you talk about it on TV. Where do you think this is going? What do you think the ultimate outcome is?
But as I always say on air, and I say in the book, indictment, anyone who thinks that they should celebrate or mourn at an indictment, hold on, because an indictment is just the first step. You have to get through all sorts of motions, legal motions, appeals probably, and then a trial. And it's very difficult to try a guy like Donald Trump because as unpopular as he is in some quarters, he's very popular in others. And I argue in the book that prosecutors have missed their moment, Merrick Garland being foremost among them, because now here we are in early to mid 2023. If you indict now, these trials won't be happening until 2024. By that point, Donald Trump's going to be in the heart of the primaries, certainly will be a front runner, might even be the presumptive nominee. You're making the job that much harder on yourself to get an actual conviction from 12-0 from a jury. So I am critical of Garland in the book for his slow pace, for his lack of focus, for his failure to focus at the top of the pyramid. This Manhattan DA potential charge is curious to me. I don't know why, and I should say I'm friends with Alvin Bragg, who's the DA. It doesn't make sense to me why on this charge, which is fairly it could be a misdemeanor under New York state law if things don't play right. Why 6.5 years after the fact? Why, based on the word of Michael Cohen, who look, I know Michael Cohen, I believe him now, but he has major credibility problems. I just don't understand that approach for going after a former president for the first time in American history.
So I want you to play defense counsel for a
Sure.
second. You are now on Donald Trump's defense team.
All
you
right.
have this case coming. What say you?
On the hush money case?
Yes.
Well, the first thing I tell Donald Trump is, look, even if you lose this case, even if you get convicted somewhere down the line, you ain't going to jail. I mean, that's not for sure, but it's unlikely to me given the potential penalties here. But my argument, first of all, I attack Michael Cohen. I say, folks, jury, their entire argument rests on Michael Cohen's testimony. Let me tell you a couple things that are not in dispute about Michael Cohen. 1, he's a convicted perjurer. 2, he's been convicted of bank fraud. 3, he's been convicted of tax fraud. This guy is a fraudster. I'm making the argument here. I'm in roll here.
Right.
Number 4, he despises Donald Trump with every fiber in his body. He wrote a book called Revenge. Mm-hmm. He cannot open his mouth without cursing out Donald Trump. He hates Donald Trump. This is the epitome of a biased witness. And finally, folks, most importantly, the key question in this case is, were those payments meant to silence Stormy Daniels in connection with the election, or were they meant to silence her in connection with personal embarrassment? And if it's personal embarrassment, there's no crime here. It was personal embarrassment. And you know how you know that? Michael Cohen said it. In 2018, he told the FEC, under oath, the Federal Election Commission, and the New York Times, that these payments had nothing to do with the election and they're not criminal. That's what he said back then, folks. Now he's got this axe to grind. He's a liar. He's a perjurer. And now they're asking you to believe him beyond a reasonable doubt. Reject that. Come back not guilty. That's my 90-second closing.
Okay. All right. I mean, it's pretty persuasive. 𝗕cie, I've seen him on TV. He hasn't done that, actually. So he made some media tips.
He's a good lawyer, though. He's a good lawyer. I mean, I
like Joe. I like Joe. I would have told Joe, don't take the case because, anything you step, Trump is a pig that likes shit. You know what I mean? So it's not just mud. You're going to end up shit on your shoes as well. You're going to end up sullied by the guy.
By the way, can I make the prosecution argument?
Yeah, go ahead.
In 60 seconds?
Yeah, please.
Folks, they paid Stormy Daniels $130,000 13 days before the election. That is undisputed. This alleged affair happened a decade before, and they falsely logged those payments as attorney fees. That in itself is a crime. Let's start with that. Why did they do it? Is it just a coincidence that this happened 13 days before an election, or was it because they had an election 13 days away and they were trying to cover up for this affair, which they knew if it got out would hurt his prospects in an election that he just barely won, folks? You don't have to believe Michael Cohen. You can believe him or not believe him, but he's backed up by the recording that we talked about earlier. He has the checks which were cut through him. He's backed up by the paperwork. There's no other reason they would have made this payment, find him guilty, etc. So, I see it both ways.
Do you think the case where, can you help me find a few more thousand votes, one more than I need in Georgia, that case is a good one?
It's a much more powerful case in that the conduct is much more serious. Everyone focuses on that one line that Trump said to Raffensperger, which is a great piece of prosecution evidence, but that's a long call that he has. It's a 62-minute call. And elsewhere on that call, Donald Trump says things like, I just want all the votes counted as they are. So he's all over the map. I mean, Anthony, you know him. When he gets amped up, he says things that are completely inconsistent minute to minute. And I think a defense lawyer will try to argue that you cannot discern criminal intent from that one line. You have to look at the totality of everything he says. Look, he clearly crossed the line. I think he probably did violate the Georgia laws against soliciting election fraud. But that's also going to be a tricky case. There's going to be a constitutional challenge there as well. The argument's going to be that a DA, a county level elected DA, cannot charge someone for anything having to do with their federal job duties. That's not going to apply to the Manhattan DA because the hush money payments were before he was president. But there is a constitutional argument that in fact, it is the law that a state level prosecutor cannot charge a federal official for anything having to do with their federal job. Now, prosecutors will argue this was completely beyond and outside of the job of president, but his folks will argue, no, he was acting in his role to take care that the laws are enforced.
Is it the opportunity to turn an indictment of Donald Trump into a conviction? Has that already passed? Or you think that there's a chance that he goes to jail?
I think the best opportunities for that absolutely have passed. I title a chapter in the book, Waiting for Garland, right? A play on Waiting for Godot, Waiting for Guffman, whatever you prefer. There's no reason Merrick Garland should take 2 years and now 2 months to get this indictment done. If he's going to indict him on January 6th, he could have subpoenaed Cassidy Hutchinson and Mark Short and these power players, Mike Pence, like is being done now. He could have subpoenaed them in the middle of 2021. He did nothing. He built from the ground up, and he got a bunch, the guys who stormed the Capitol, he had to do that, but he did not build anywhere. And I think for the reasons we said before, I think arguing this case, charging this case in 2021 and arguing it to a jury in early 2022, the conduct is much more immediate. You're not in the heat of the next political election. Charging this case in 2023 and arguing it in 2024, you're asking for trouble. The jury's going to think, if it's so urgent, why did it take so long? And again, you're asking a jury to convict a guy who's going to be probably the front runner or one of the front runners for one of the 2 major party nominations. That's a heavy lift.
So does it take a criminal to catch a criminal? I mean, when I read the book, I'm saying to myself, you guys do better, prosecutors do better when they have somebody super nefarious that understands the nefarious ways of who they're going after. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. In fact, I say in the book, there's this, if all you ever did was watch the TV shows and CSI and SVU and all that, you would think that every case is solved by like lab magic and DNA and blood spatters. The reality is the way that, especially the feds make crimes, is cooperating witnesses. I have put on way worse people than Michael Cohen. I have based cases off of murderers. The key comes down to corroboration. Can you back them up? When you ask a jury to believe a convicted criminal, you're not asking them to believe this person as a matter of faith because they're a good human being. You're saying, look at all the evidence that backs them up. Look at the phone records. Look at the financials. Look at the forensics. Look at other witness testimony. And I give examples in the book of cases where I happen to be lucky and have good corroboration, and other cases like Danny Marino where I didn't have much corroboration at all. That is the whole ballgame. But yeah, Anthony, we our standard line with juries was always, folks, we would love to call nurses and school teachers up to the witness stand to explain how this worked. But guess what? Those folks can't take you inside the 𝗕ģenovese family. Only another gangster can. And you can fill in the blank for whatever the organization and whoever the cooperator is. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with doing that. Prosecutors do build cases and can and should build cases off of criminals. But you want to make sure that A, they've told you everything, and B, that you can back them up.
I want to go to a few other people. Let's go to Jeff Epstein for a second.
Yeah.
Got in trouble, went to jail, came out of jail, perpetuated more trouble, and was heading to jail for what looked like a very long time. And then what happened?
When you say went to jail the first time, I would say barely.
Right, barely. It was a negotiated agreement.
13 months,
that's what got the labor secretary in trouble, right? Because he was the DA working on that, or the U.S. attorney working on that.
And they let him spend his weekdays at his lawyer's office instead of behind bars. I'm very critical of Acosta, Alexander Acosta, who was the U.S. attorney. He gave Jeffrey Epstein a ridiculously soft deal, like we said, a state prostitution charge instead of federal human trafficking charges. I argue in the book he was just intimidated by this dream team that I put that in quotes because I don't believe so strongly in Alan Dershowitz's legal skills or Ken Starr's, but they're both high-priced, intimidating lawyers. But Epstein put together this monster legal defense team that really just overwhelmed Acosta, who, and I argue in the book, and I have evidence of this, not that he took a bribe or was corrupt. He just didn't have the stones to do this case. And one of his own people said he just got overwhelmed. He was too intimidated by these lawyers. And it wasn't until 10 years later, and Julie Brown, an excellent reporter, sort of blew the lid off of this, and Acosta becomes a cabinet secretary, drawing a lot of attention, that finally, belatedly, the SDNY, my former office, jumps in and charges him appropriately with crimes that, you're right, would have certainly kept him locked up for the rest of his natural life. But then he ends up dying shortly thereafter in prison. So he would have skirted justice altogether if not for the media and if not for political pressure.
So do you watch The Mayors of Kingstown with Jeremy?
No, but I know it's set in Philly, my home area. I'm from South Jersey. That's my area. So I know the people talk like people I grew up with, but I haven't seen it.
All right. But, yeah, I mean, listen, there's a little bit of a movement there between the cops and the prison guards and the prisoners. How the hell are both prison guards off duty or taking a break and the cameras are down and Epstein has committed suicide? I mean, when you hear 𝗕𝗶𝘁𝗵𝗵 outside, it's a horse. It's not a zebra. So you think he committed suicide? I don't. I'm just going to tell you flat out.
I don't know. I will say it is outrageous that there was not round-the-clock coverage on him. That they don't have video is wild to me. I've been in that building, that MCC, the Metropolitan Correctional Center, many, many times. I mean, there wouldn't be video inside the cell, but you would absolutely have video of who's coming and going down the hallway and who would have hung a left or a right into the cell.
I mean, tell me about Bill Cosby. You write about him in the book. Yeah.
Cosby also got a free ride the first time. Prosecutors in that case, the Montgomery County, I think it was, DA in Philly, when they interviewed the first victim, they did it on the phone. That is the exact opposite of the way you approach someone who claims they're a sexual assault victim. You meet with them in person to build that trust. And then when it came time to interview Cosby, they go into Manhattan, meet Cosby at his lawyer's office, and they come out, the chief of police, he's gushing. His quote was something like, he was wearing his typical Cosby sweater, and I don't see anything wrong with anything he said. I mean, the guy's practically fanboying over Bill Cosby, and they gave him a pass. And then they screwed it up even worse because they gave him a pass so that he would be forced to testify at his civil trial. They said, well, we're not going to charge him criminally, but now he has to testify in his civil case, which can't be used against him criminally. And he goes and testifies and he admits he uses Quaaludes and all this. And then they double back and they just reverse themselves and say, actually, now we are going to use your testimony against you. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ultimately said, correctly, you can't do that, prosecutors. You can't lure the guy into testifying by lying to him and then take it back. And so the prosecutors there, A, they gave him a pass the first time through, and B, they screwed it up the second time. And that's why he's free right now.
All right, I'm going to go right to our 5 words because of your battery dilemma.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
No problem. Okay, 5 words. You're going to react to them. Okay?
Oh, okay.
All right, ready? It's actually 5 people. Bernie Madoff.
Villain. Is this just like one word or quick? Or,
no, yeah, okay. Give me your little
Bernie Madoff is an all-time villain.
We're Jews and Italians, Elie. We don't say things in like one word. We need more.
I'm proud of my former office, the Southern District of New York. A bunch of my friends were in on the team that prosecuted him, and he got what he deserved.
Bill Cosby.
I write in the book about when I was a kid, when we were kids, Anthony. The man was
everybody's dad. He was.
I try to explain to my students who I teach at college. Think of Tom Hanks right now. That's how he was beloved.
Right.
But really, when you dig in, I mean, I did some research in this case. When you dig into what he did, I mean, just an absolute remorseless predator. And the fact that he's out of jail now, like I said, it's the prosecutor's fault. He's lucky that he's out of jail. The decision was actually correct by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, but prosecutors just absolutely botched that case.
Harvey Weinstein.
Same thing. Also, I think a lot of people turn blind eyes to him because he was so powerful. I mean, this is another one of those things like Cosby, where it was a bit of an open secret when you dig into it. A lot of people knew what he was doing, but were afraid to stand up to him. Finally, and Cy Vance, the Manhattan DA, gave him a pass as well, inexplicable and inexcusable, but ultimately got what he deserved belatedly and only because of media pressure and public pressure.
Donald Trump.
Houdini. A lawless Houdini, I call him in the book, because he has slipped away at every turn. I think it's quite likely he will be indicted, quite possibly very, very soon. But I also think the chances of A, convicting him, and B, that he gets sentenced to prison, and C, that all of that gets held up on appeal is very, very low right now.
And the indictment may make him politically stronger, too.
It may be, right? I mean, that's what I've heard from a lot of political people who understand how this works. So I think he may get some measure of justice in the form of an indictment, but far, far, far from full justice.
All right, 2 last questions, my brothers. Sam Bankman-Fried.
Yeah.
Will he elude justice? He's a high-profile guy. I'm sure someone in his family is reading your book right now.
I don't think so. The Southern District of New York, my old office, is prosecuting him. This is an example of DOJ acting very quickly. They prosecuted him within a matter of weeks. He has said some self-defeating things in his PR tours. You don't want to get caught on the wrong end of a securities fraud case from the Southern District of New York. So no, I don't think he's going to beat that case.
And he's also got 3 of his cohorts have already pled out guilty,
cooperating.
So it's super hard on that situation.
Yep.
You wrote an amazing book about Bill Barr. It was called The Hatchet Man. You came on for that. Thank you. We now have in Untouchable, how powerful people get away with it. What's next for you, Elie?
Book-wise, Anthony, I want to tell a story next time. I do some behind-the-scenes reporting in this book. I get into what happened at DOJ in the Southern District of New York and tell the story that no one's ever told before of how the Michael Cohen prosecution happened and how DOJ sort of circled the wagons around Donald Trump. I want to find one of those like Michael Lewis stories, one of those stories that's been out there that hasn't been told, but that sort of reveals some larger truth about us in the legal field. I don't have it yet. I'm going to take my time. I did 2 books in a year and a half, Anthony. That's what.
No, I mean it's some prolific writing.
No,
and also you got fancy pants people at your book parties too. I was name dropping that I met people at your book party.
We missed you this one,
especially your dad, by the way, who I greatly enjoyed. Okay,
my parents love talking to you, and
he was totally my kind of guy. We're like.
Listen, my dad, like you, Anthony, is a self-made guy. He put himself through school and he built up a nice law practice. And because of him, he raised us nicely. So I think you guys have
that's how it's supposed to be, though. I mean, that's my father. When I got the job, when I got into Harvard, my parents were clueless. They thought it was Hartford. They wanted to take me to Connecticut. They had no clue because they're not educated. But when I got the job at Goldman, my mother lied about that. She'd telling people it was a law firm. She was embarrassed that I wasn't a lawyer, right? But my father said something to me that I'll never forget. He's like, hey, you're indoors, you're out of direct sunlight, and there's no heavy lifting. So don't ever complain about the job.
And you're on a salary. It's not an hourly wage.
Yeah, exactly. So whatever the hell's going on in the world, you're not gonna miss a meal. You gotta be chill. But why I like you, and hopefully the reason why you like me, is that we got raised right. We're not gonna do anything wrong. I'm never gonna dishonor my parents by doing something wrong, because why would I violate my dad's last name? Why would I turn on him after watching him work as hard as he worked to give us the life that he gave us?
100%.
You know what I mean?
I totally agree with that. By the way, it's funny because I think we're sort of one generation removed from you, but my grandparents, my dad's both parents, were Holocaust survivors. Never met my grandfather. That's who I'm named after. My full name's Eliezer. He died in 1960. But my grandmother was this incredibly tough woman who survived the concentration camps and raised 2 kids on her own in 𝗵𝗫que, New Jersey. And when I got into Harvard, she said it didn't ring a bell. She didn't know what it was. Right. And she said, well, where is it? I said, it's kind of near Boston. I showed her on a map. And you know what her response was? She goes, it's too far. It's too far. Why would you go that far?
Yeah, I love these people. I live 2 miles from my mother. Yeah. My brother lives 4 miles. My mother's like, you think you could move closer like your brother Anthony? It's like he needs a passport to go 4 miles to her house. Yeah, you know what I mean? But that's what these people, this is the families that we come from and we remember and we try to acknowledge a tradition. I left out one of the 5 words. You mind if I go there before we go? Ready? Jeff Epstein. I forgot to say Jeff Epstein.
Villain. Utter and complete villain who should have been locked away from society much earlier than he was.
All right. Well, you're the man to spend all this time with me. I'm giving you a hug. And,
great to talk to you, Anthony.
Let's get a beer one night.
Yeah,
all right?
man. I miss you. Let's hang out sometime.